The air inside Pete Maxwell's ranch house was thick and still, just after midnight on July 14th, 1881. Outside, in the oppressive New Mexico heat, Lincoln County Sheriff Pat Garrett and his two deputies, John Poe and Thomas McKinney, waited in the shadows. Garrett slipped inside, leaving his men on the porch, and moved through the darkness to Maxwell's bedroom. As he began to question Maxwell about the whereabouts of a certain high-profile fugitive, a figure appeared in the doorway. Barefoot and carrying a butcher knife, the man hadn't come to attack. He just wanted a slice of that sweet late-night beef. He spotted the deputies outside, pulled out his revolver, and recoiled into the dark room, calling out for the men to identify themselves. Then things went eerily quiet for a moment, before two blasts rang out in the dark. There was a brief strangling gasp and then nothing. This was the moment the law and history recorded the death of one of the Old West's most famous outlaws, a man known as Billy the Kid. Yet, for a story that appeared to have been ended with such finality, it refused to stay buried. The very circumstances that Garrett would describe as a stroke of luck were the same ones that made his story vulnerable to doubt. His deputies, waiting outside, were documented to have been initially skeptical that the dead man was the famous outlaw. This ambiguity, born in the same instant as the Kid's official death, provided the fertile ground for one of the Old West's most persistent legends. To this day, many question whether Billy the Kid escaped and survived, living on into old age despite all the odds. Before he was a legend, Billy the Kid was Henry McCarty, born in a New York slum to Irish immigrants around 1859. And if you're wondering how he came to be known as Billy, well, by the 1870s, he was going by the alias William Bonney. His early life was a westward drift with his mother Catherine that ended in Silver City, New Mexico. When she died of tuberculosis, as was the style at the time, the orphaned teenager was cast adrift, working odd jobs before his first arrest for stealing cheese. Physically, he wasn't much to look at, but he possessed a disarming charisma. He loved to sing, dance, drink, and gamble to excess, and was described as being the life of the party. He was also fluent in Spanish, which made him fit in much easier with the population of New Mexico. And keep this in mind, because his ability to rizz up local Latinas in Espanol will be a factor when we discuss the claimants to his identity. This charm, however, was paired with a quick and lethal temper. His transformation into a wanted outlaw was forged in the crucible of the Lincoln County feud. This brutal conflict began as a more traditional fight between an established merchant faction, the Murphy Dolan Company, and a newcomer, John Tunstall. The Kid worked for Tunstall, and when his employer was slain by a posse allied with the Murphy Dolan faction, he didn't pack it up and go home. He joined a deputized posse called the Regulators to hunt down those who had slain Tunstall, believing he was an agent of justice in a territory where the law was corrupt. The whole thing degenerated into a tit-for-tat slaughter, and eventually the Kid cut down a lawman, making him a wanted man. Later, Old West legends would claim he was one of the deadliest outlaws, having taken 21 lives in his 21 years on Earth, though this is now believed to be an exercise in myth-building. That said, don't get mistaken and think Billy the Kid wasn't a dangerous man. Despite only making it to our modern drinking age, he was directly involved in the elimination of at least 9 men, and that's just what's been documented and confirmed. After being captured by Pat Garrett and sentenced to hang, the Kid cemented his legendary status with a daring escape from the Lincoln County Courthouse. In the process of the escape, he eliminated 2 lawmen, including shooting one of them in the back as he tried to escape. This jailbreak made him a folk hero to some, while others viewed him as a cold-blooded monster who had to be eliminated immediately. Decades after the shots in Maxwell's bedroom, men emerged claiming the story was a lie. The two most famous claimants offered compelling, if deeply flawed, narratives that have captivated believers ever since. In 1948, an elderly man in Hyco, Texas, named Brushy Bill Roberts, confessed to a paralegal named William Morrison that he was the real Billy the Kid. Roberts, then allegedly around 90 years old, claimed he was tired of hiding and wanted Morrison's help to secure a pardon for his actions. His evidence was based on personal testimony. He allegedly showed Morrison 26 scars from bullet and knife wounds that matched injuries the kid had supposedly sustained. He also possessed an intimate knowledge of the Lincoln County conflict, and Morrison managed to secure sworn affidavits from a few surviving acquaintances of the kid. According to Roberts, Garrett's posse had mistakenly ended the life of an innocent man named Billy Barlow on the night in question. In this version of events, Billy the Kid took this opportunity to escape and assume a new identity, eventually transforming into Brushy Bill the Prospector. However, the case for Brushy Bill quickly falls apart under scrutiny. Most historians dismiss the claim, pointing to a family Bible that records his birth year as 1879, which would have made him a toddler when the kid died. Further, despite Brushy Bill claiming to have 26 battle scars, Billy the Kid was only shot once and was never recorded to have been stabbed. Billy was definitely more of a giver than a taker when it came to combat wounds, but Brushy Bill didn't seem to get the memo on that part. Notably, Billy the Kid was literate, while Brushy Bill was not. Further, Billy the Kid spoke Spanish at a native level fluency, and he is well documented as having used this linguistic proficiency to win over the local ladies and chill with bad hombres. Further, Roberts had previously claimed to be a member of the Jesse James gang, suggesting a pattern of adopting notorious identities. Some modern analyses even propose his case was an extreme form of celebrity worship, where his own identity had merged with that of the famous outlaw he admired. In essence, he was so obsessed with these Wild West figures that he may have developed a real, though completely delusional belief that he was one of them. Notably, the corpses of the man who Pat Garrett said was Billy the Kid and Brushy Bill are still available for testing, though the authorities have blocked exhumation efforts. The claim of John Miller is more mysterious and is built on a foundation of circumstantial evidence and secondhand stories. Miller, a farmer who died in Arizona in 1937, never made a public claim, but friends and family insisted he was the kid. According to them, he wouldn't admit it when sober, but when he got absolutely blotto, he would sing like a canary. Crucially, there are almost no official records of a John Miller existing before August 1881, less than a month after the kid's supposed death. Unlike Brushy Bill, John Miller was actually fluent in Spanish and was also literate. After his passing, his Mexican-American wife confirmed his ability to speak Spanish at a native level and also attested to his ability to slip out of handcuffs. Billy the Kid had famously slipped out of cuffs on a couple of occasions. And yeah, I'm just going to leave that last bit right there and not make the obvious joke about what this couple might have been getting up to in their private lives. While the stories of Roberts and Miller are interesting and have a lot of popular support, the historical consensus supports the official account of the kid's death. This conclusion rests not on folklore, but on the weight of contemporary evidence. The single most powerful document is the coroner's jury report, filed the day after the shooting. A jury of local men, many of whom knew the kid personally, examined the body and identified it as William Bonney. This legal document, created at the time of the event, is the bedrock of the historical record. While this would be definitive if we were talking about a document issued today, it's a bit less definitive than you might think. This was after all the Wild West, and Pat Garrett and his posse had $500 riding on this jury, determining the body was that of Billy. In a time and place where the line between lawman and outlaw could change back and forth with stunning rapidity, the jury may have been pressured to just go along with the identification. Beyond the inquest, an official paper trail confirms the government acted on the certainty of the kid's death. Records show the New Mexico Attorney General and the governor approved the $500 reward payment to Pat Garrett on the basis of the coroner's jury report. According to those who believe the official narrative, these bureaucratic actions would not have occurred if there were any credible doubt about the identity of the deceased. Garrett also made a crucial strategic move by putting the body on public display in Fort Sumner. In an era without modern forensics, visual identification by the community was the highest standard of proof. That said, decomposition in the heat is a very real problem, and to what extent the body actually resembled Billy the Kid at the time of this event is unknown. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy, just taking a moment to shout out all my subscribers, YouTube members, and patrons. Also, don't forget to check out the video podcast by clicking the link in the description. I also have two other channels, Lazy Chill Zone and Lazy Chill True Crime, which you can find by searching them up. On July 14, 1882, a man named James Yost was hauling wood through the dry grasslands of West Turkey Creek Canyon in Arizona Territory when his dog started acting strangely. Nearing a peculiar cluster of 5 large oak trees that grew in a semicircle from a single root, Yost saw what he first took to be a man sleeping. But the dog's nervous snorting told a different story, and upon investigation, Yost found the lifeless body of one of the West's most notorious outlaws, Johnny Ringo. He was seated on a large, flat rock within the embrace of the oaks, his back against a tree in an almost peaceful pose. But the scene was anything but peaceful. A single bullet had entered his right temple and exited the top of his head. His weapon was still in his hand, and it looked very clear what happened. But as time went on, this clear-cut scene became one of the Old West's greatest mysteries. Ringo was barefoot, his feet wrapped in makeshift bindings torn from his own undershirt. His horse, with his boots still tied to the saddle, wouldn't be found for another 11 days, 2 miles away. He wore 2 cartridge belts, but the one for his revolver was buckled upside down, an inexplicable mistake for a seasoned veteran of the Old West. Most disturbing of all was a small, clean cut at the base of his scalp, as if someone had taken a piece of his head to prove that the deed was done. To understand how Johnny Ringo ended up under those oaks, you have to understand the man he was. Born in Indiana in 1850, his life was defined by a profound, early trauma. At the age of 14, while his family migrated west, he witnessed his father accidentally take a shotgun blast directly to the face. The family was forced to bury him on a hillside along the trail and move on, with little time to contemplate whether this was really an accident or not. This gruesome event created a dark psychological echo that would reverberate throughout Ringo's own life. In the years that followed, Ringo cultivated the persona of a refined, educated gentleman outlaw, a man who could quote Shakespeare and carried a small library of classic books. Many who knew him described him as a reserved, college-educated man, though the truth was more complex. While well-read, Ringo had very little in the way of formal schooling. This intellectual image was a performance, a charming mask for a disturbed and violent man who wanted to be known for something other than his willingness to blast his Roscoe. His outlaw career began in earnest in Texas, where he got his start committing some cold-blooded slayings. After the heat got too hot under the Texas sun, he decided it was best to move on. After drifting to Arizona, he fell in with the loose confederation of rustlers known as the Cochise County Cowboys. In Tombstone, his reputation for a foul temper was cemented by incidents like shooting a man simply for refusing a shot of whiskey in favor of beer. Ringo was not present for the famous showdown at the OK Corral, but in its aftermath, he became a chief antagonist of the Earp faction. He openly challenged Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday to a fight on the streets of Tombstone, a confrontation that was only stopped when a constable intervened. The Earps, in turn, suspected Ringo was involved in the ambush that crippled Virgil Earp and the slaying of Morgan Earp. When Wyatt Earp began his infamous vendetta ride, Ringo, despite being an absolute psychopath, was deputized by the sheriff of Tombstone to hunt him down. Faced with the scene in Turkey Creek Canyon, a coroner's jury quickly reached a verdict. They looked at the scene and figured that this was the work of one man, Johnny Ringo himself. This ruling was supported by a considerable amount of anecdotal evidence. The story about the so-called accident his dad had during the family's westward travels was well known, and suggested a potential family history of this sort of event. In the months before his death, Ringo was reportedly in a deep state of despair. The Earp vendetta had decimated the ranks of his friends and allies. Further, he had recently visited his family in California and had been met with a cool reception and politely told he wasn't welcome to stay there, leaving him feeling rejected. The freewheeling, lawless world he knew was vanishing, and he seemed to be vanishing with it. His final days were spent in a prolonged drunken stupor. He left Tombstone after the 4th of July celebrations with several bottles of booze and was last seen by a sheriff's deputy who noted that he was falling off his horse. More telling were Ringo's own premonitions. He had told a newspaper editor just weeks earlier that he only had a few weeks left at best, and he implied that this event could be caused by either himself or by his enemies. Despite the official ruling, the strange clues at the scene have fueled speculation of a slaying for over a century. Several suspects have been named, their motives rooted in the legendary feuds of Tombstone, Arizona. The most famous and cinematic theory is that Wyatt Earp, perhaps accompanied by Doc Holliday, secretly rode back into Arizona to fill Ringo full of lead and complete his vendetta. Earp himself helped craft this narrative in his later years, even providing his biographer with a detailed account of a supposed duel. This story provides a satisfying, dramatic conclusion to the Earp Cowboy War, pitting the two factions' champions against each other in a final showdown. However, this theory completely falls apart under factual scrutiny since Ringo died in July 1882. Earp and his posse had fled Arizona as wanted men 4 months earlier, in March. Doc Holliday, the other supposed participant, attended court in Colorado the same day as Ringo perished. Wyatt Earp himself was documented to be in Colorado as well during this period, though his whereabouts are less ironclad. Further dispelling this account is the fact that both of these men were wanted outlaws in Arizona at the time, with substantial bounties on their heads. The consensus from historians is now that Wyatt Earp simply fabricated this event while he was building his own legend in the early 20th century. A far more plausible suspect was a man Ringo considered a friend, a very bad hombre named Buckskin Frank Leslie. Buckskin was a bartender, a scout, and a known psychopath who was, in essence, a serial predator before the terminology had been coined. The evidence against him is compelling. In November 1882, Leslie got into an argument with one of Ringo's good friends, a fellow outlaw named Billy Claiborne. To defend his honor, Buckskin promptly eliminated Claiborne, with some accounts having him finishing off the man in cold blood, even after he posed no threat. Claiborne's dying words to those around him made it clear that he had seen Buckskin shoot Ringo. Years later, while serving a sentence for slaying his wife, Buckskin reportedly confessed to a prison guard that he had, in fact, eliminated Ringo. According to this account, Buckskin, Claiborne, and Ringo were in the Turkey Creek area when the men got into an argument. Buckskin claimed he shot in self-defense, but this is a guy with a lot of bodies to his name, including completely innocent people, so take that with a grain of salt. A final, often overlooked suspect is a gambler named Michael O'Rourke. In 1881, O'Rourke eliminated a man in a nearby town over a minor disagreement, and an angry mob formed up to hunt him down. Johnny Ringo was amongst the members of this mob, and Wyatt Earp ended up stepping in to save O'Rourke's life. Under this theory, this gambler saved by Earp may have done a favor for him by taking out Johnny Ringo. While the motive is clear, the most persuasive evidence is what happened after Ringo's death. One of Ringo's closest friends later hunted down and slew Michael O'Rourke. According to some, this can be seen as a verdict delivered by way of Old West frontier justice. In the end, the death of Johnny Ringo remains an unsolvable case. The official verdict is supported by his psychological state, but contradicted by the bizarre physical evidence and circumstantial evidence. While the theory blaming Wyatt Earp directly is a fiction, the cases against Frank Leslie and Michael O'Rourke have significant circumstantial evidence in their favor. However, unless we have some unlikely new evidence that surfaces, such as a journal entry with a very direct confession that matches the evidence, the truth will remain an unsolved mystery. It begins with a photograph, as so many great mysteries do. Taken in February 1901 at DeYoung Studio in New York City's bustling Union Square, the portrait captures a man and a woman of striking confidence and style. He is handsome, well-dressed, and would soon be known to lawmen across 2 continents as Harry Longabaugh, the Sundance Kid. She's arrestingly beautiful, her expression poised and intelligent, and we know her as Etta Place, but if you asked her parents, that name would be out of place, because she wasn't born that way. Pinned to the lapel of her fashionable dress is a delicate gold watch from Tiffany's, a recent gift not from her companion, but from their partner in crime, Butch Cassidy. This small detail hints at the complex, 3-way partnership that defined their lives. The couple purchased 5 copies of the portrait, mailing them to family and friends as a de facto marriage announcement, though no official record of their union has ever been found. Days later, they, along with Cassidy, boarded the British steamship Herminius and sailed for Buenos Aires, fleeing the long arm of the law for a new life in Argentina. But what was intended as a private commemoration of their future soon became a weapon used against them. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency, relentless in its pursuit of the Wild Bunch, acquired a copy of the photograph. Almost overnight, the image was transformed from a personal token into the centerpiece of wanted posters, reproduced and distributed from the plains of Wyoming to the pampas of Patagonia. The very portrait meant to celebrate their bond became the primary tool that would hound them and ultimately contribute to its dissolution. This artifact is the perfect metaphor for Etta Place herself. It provides the most concrete proof of her existence, a clear and confident face staring out from the turn of the 20th century. Yet it tells us nothing of who she was before that moment, or what became of her after. The photograph is both a window and a wall. It allows us to see her, making her vividly real, in a way other historical figures are not, but it captures a persona, an alias, at the very moment she was creating it. By disseminating this image, the Pinkertons effectively cemented the identity of Etta Place, while simultaneously erasing any trace of the woman she had been before. The photograph marks the beginning of her official story and the end of the trail to her origins. She stepped out of complete anonymity, lived in the historical spotlight for 5 years, and then vanished back into the mists. She left this single haunting image as the only definitive proof she was ever there at all. Every part of the identity we know was a careful construct, starting with the name itself. Place was the maiden name of Sundance's mother, a convenient alias he often used to cover his tracks. The name she actually used when signing hotel registers in the United States was Ethel. The Pinkertons believed her birth year was around 1878. However, it's unclear how they came to this conclusion, or if it was simply an educated guess based on her youthful appearance. Those who met her consistently remarked on a fascinating set of contradictions. She was described as cordial and refined, and spoke in an educated manner that suggested an East Coast background. Yet, this same woman was an expert writer and a crack shot with both a Roscoe and a rifle, skills more suited to the rugged frontier. This has led to historians trying to find any records of her birth or how she arrived in the West, and perhaps surprisingly, they have had some luck. Some stories suggest that she was a school teacher who was brought out from the East, while other stories suggest that she was working in society's oldest profession. And perhaps surprisingly, these two personas and professions aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, and there's actually some decent circumstantial evidence for it. In fact, the most plausible, though still unproven, theory about her identity provides a compelling synthesis of both narratives. The 1900 census records for San Antonio list a woman named Ethel Bishop living in a house of ill repute often visited by Butch, Sundance, and the Wild Bunch. Crucially, her occupation is listed as unemployed music teacher, suggesting that she fell upon hard times. By early 1901, the pressure from the Pinkertons had become immense. Following a string of audacious train and bank robberies, the Wild Bunch was the most wanted gang in America, and their world was shrinking. Butch, Sundance, and Etta made a bold decision. They would flee the country and start over. After their stop in New York City for photos and fine jewelry, they set sail for South America in 1901. Their destination was both a hideout and a place of reinvention. Using the substantial profits from their last robberies, they purchased a sprawling ranch in the remote Cholilla Valley of Patagonia in Argentina. They intended to go straight, and Etta herself held title to more than 2,000 acres in her own name. For a time, the remains of the Wild Bunch became the Mild Bunch, probably more concerned about the price fluctuations of beef and grain than any passing trains laden with riches. Surprisingly, given the time involved, they traveled back to America on a couple of occasions. But by 1905, things were looking rough, and the law had caught up to them. They fled from Argentina into Chile, seeking refuge in the shadow of the Andes Mountains. Here they resorted back to their old ways, with Etta participating in a bank robbery in 1905. But simply put, she was over it, and by 1906, she had made her decision. Well, that's what historians assume, since all evidence suggests that Sundance didn't want to lose her. Sundance escorted her back to the United States, a clear sign that she was the one who initiated the final separation. In June of that year, he accompanied her on the long sea voyage from Chile to San Francisco. After seeing her settled, he turned around and sailed back to South America alone. He would be eliminated within 2 years, reportedly cut down alongside Butch Cassidy in a firefight with Bolivian soldiers in November 1908. Etta, however, didn't vanish the moment she stepped off the boat. Her last confirmed location was still in San Francisco in 1907, a full year after her arrival. The final tantalizing ripple from her life appeared in 1909. A woman matching Etta's description approached the U.S. vice consul in Chile, requesting assistance in obtaining a death certificate for one Harry Longabaugh. No certificate could be issued, and the woman's identity was never officially confirmed, though the vice consul was familiar with her appearance from the wanted posters. But if it was Etta, this act represents the final, logical step in a carefully planned exit. For over a century, the vacuum left by Etta Place's disappearance has been filled with speculation. The most popular and enduring theory was that Etta Place was actually Ann Bassett, the queen of the cattle rustlers from Colorado. The case was compelling. Bassett was born in the same year as Etta, ran with the Wild Bunch, was romantically linked to Butch Cassidy, and was also a skilled rider and shooter. Most convincingly, she bore a striking physical resemblance to Etta. In the 90s, a computer facial recognition analysis performed by a scientist at Los Alamos National Laboratory concluded they were almost certainly the same person. However, the theory collapses under the weight of contemporary evidence. A comparison of their timelines, based on legal documents and contemporary newspaper reports, proves they were two different women in two different places at the same time. To give just one example, Ann Bassett was standing trial in Wyoming for cattle rustling at a point in 1904 when Etta Place was documented to have been in South America. Some have made pretty wild claims about the use of body doubles, or claimed that Etta could have made it back to stand trial, both of which strike me as incredibly unlikely. Bassett lived a long and public life until her death in 1956, never once claiming to be Etta Place, even in her own memoirs. Anyway, I've put up the only known photographs of each woman side by side, and personally I think there's a pretty strong resemblance. But the other facts just don't add up. The second major theory identified Etta as Eunice Gray, a woman who ran a house of ill repute and later a hotel in Fort Worth, Texas. This theory was championed by a local newspaper editor who noted that Gray claimed to have spent time in South America for her health during the same period Etta was there. For decades, the lack of a photograph of a young Eunice Gray kept the theory alive. That changed in 2007 when a researcher located photographs of her, and they really don't look anything alike at all. However, it's always possible that a photograph could have been incorrectly marked or cataloged, meaning that this photograph may not depict Eunice Gray. Unlike Butch and Sundance, whose story has a likely finale in Bolivia, Etta's story simply stops. After 1909, she simply vanishes from the record, and there's nothing further to indicate what actually happened to her. Personally, I suspect that she may have simply stayed somewhere in South America, given that she was a high-profile wanted fugitive in the United States. That said, her status as a fugitive in America didn't stop her from coming back to the country previously. Further, it's always possible that she simply got tied up with the wrong sort of people in South America. Etta Place clearly wasn't the sort of person who contented herself with living a normal life, and it's very possible that she may have come to harm from one of the people she met. At the end of the day, the disappearance of Etta Place will likely continue to remain one of the Old West's unsolved mysteries. That said, I have a faint hope that eventually we'll find a diary attributed to her or someone close to her that may break the whole historical cold case wide open.